Hi folks, welcome to another Lanzarote information video from me, Mike. And this is one of our regular informational videos aimed at giving you information you might not otherwise have about the island. And today we're talking about picon. Now, picon is the black stuff you see all over anywhere that there is stuff growing on Lanzarote, those little tiny granules of sort of black gravel. Now, just to confuse the issue, some people, particularly in rural areas, call it Rofe, but we'll stick with picon because that is the most common way it's described. And in this video, we'll answer what it is and why it's so beneficial to the island, because it really is desperately important to anything that's growing here. So let's kick off with what it is. Basically, it's a kind of volcanic ash. And what happens when volcanoes erupt is they throw molten little bits of lava, hundreds, sometimes thousands of feet into the air, and that rains down as picon, or as we call it, picon. So the picon you see all over the island has come about from the Big Timman fire eruptions in 1731 to 1736, and also from the later eruptions that happened in 1824. And in the areas around Timman fire, it's up to 10 meters deep. So there was an awful lot of this stuff spewed up into the air that then rained down over that whole area and the plateau going down towards Playa Blanca. And it's predominantly black, pretty much 80 to 90% of it is black. But we can actually also have red picon here, which you may have seen on some roundabouts, in ornamental flower beds. And there are 2 or 3, as they are described, red mountains on the island where the picon is mined from them because it's this unusual colour. The red picon tends to be just slightly larger. The granules are a bit heavier and more sizable than the black ones that we see most commonly. And picon, after the Timman fire eruptions, basically transformed the island, and that was because picon made it possible to grow things that we hadn't been able to grow very successfully in the past. You have to remember that Lanzarote is a desert climate. We get very little rain here. We don't have any natural water on the island. And one of the biggest issues that causes is where there is exposed soil, it just turns to dust under the heat of the sun, and it can then just be blown away. When we do get heavy rain, which we do occasionally, it's just washed away in rivers of mud. So that's the first big benefit of picon. It's a soil erosion measure. And while it fell all around the mountains of Timman fire, it was then taken using camels as transport to various other parts of the island, particularly the north of Lanzarote, where it was put on fields in order to help prevent that soil erosion. But that isn't the only thing it does. Picon also acts as a weed barrier. And by putting this layer on top of the soil, it makes it quite difficult for weeds to be able to poke up through it, particularly if you have a nice, decent layer of it on top of your soil. But also, when the strong weeds do poke through, it makes it very easy to spot them and to pull them out before they get too big and get too much of a grip with their roots into the soil. So it's a weed barrier as well. But the most important thing about picon, and the thing that really makes it a magical substance for Lanzarote, is that it both absorbs moisture into the soil and traps it in there once it's there. Obviously, having a layer of picon on top of the soil prevents the soil being exposed directly to the sun. So that's how it helps trap the moisture in the soil. But the really, really clever bit about picon is that because it's black and it heats up during the day and cools down at night, is that as it's going through that cool down process at night, it attracts any moisture in the air into it, and then it just effectively drips through underneath into the soil. And you can test this out for yourself. Go along anywhere where you can see a relatively thick layer of picon. First thing in the morning, if you dig your hand down into it, you'll find that the lower part of it is really quite moist, and that is feeding moisture from the air directly into the soil, even in midsummer on a particularly hot day, because the difference between the heat of the day and the relative cool of the night draws that moisture in from the air. It's almost magical the way it works. So where do we get it from? Because I'm looking out of the kitchen window at our garden, and our garden, of course, like pretty much every other garden on the island, is covered in a healthy layer of picon. But we can't just rock up to Timanfaya or any other volcano and fill sacks of it up and carry them home in the boots of our cars. Some of the island's volcanoes have been designated picon quarries, and people with a specific license can go and effectively quarry it out of the ground. I mean, that really just requires scooping it up out of the ground into trucks. What they do then is grade it, so you can get very, very fine picon, you can get a kind of mid-sized one, and you can get a chunkier one as well if that's your thing. And the picon is then sold either in plastic bags, which weigh around 5 or 10 kilos, and you can pick them up at garden centres, or if you've got a relatively big garden, you can just order a truckload of it to be delivered to your house. And the truck will simply tip the picon into your driveway or wherever else you decide that you want it, and then you can barrow it across to all the different parts of your garden. And maintaining it is relatively easy. You simply just rake it over and rake any leaves off it, dead leaves and stuff like that. And then every probably 4 or 5 years you might order some more so that you can put a new fresh layer on top. It looks beautiful when it's brand new and very, very crisp. If it gets too dusty through a kalima or whatever, and there isn't any rain to wash that dust away, you can just hose it down and bring it back to its normal and very effective blackness. So that's the story of picon or Rofe. I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you did, please give this video a like. If you've got a question about it or anything relating to Lanzarote, just put it in comments below. I read every single comment and I will do my very best to answer your questions. Have you got a story about picon? I'd love to hear it. Again, put a comment in below and let me know. Thank you so much for watching once again, and bye for now, everyone.